Hi everybody, this is Viewpoint Libertarian. I'm going to talk about why libertarians need Austrian economics, and I will include an explanation of the Austrian business cycle theory. The business cycle is the swings in the economy going up and down, growth and recession, in case you didn't know. First, and very briefly, I want to direct your attention to something amazing. If you have never heard of Peter Schiff, you have got to check this video out. Between 2002 and 2008, Peter Schiff was warning people that the boom in housing was a bubble created by the Fed, and that the bubble was going to burst with catastrophic consequences. All the supposed experts were literally laughing at and ridiculing Peter Schiff for saying housing was going to collapse. So before watching this video, open another tab and search for Peter Schiff was right in YouTube and watch the first video that comes up. It is truly amazing. So watch that first if you haven't seen it before and then come back to this one. The important thing is that Peter Schiff applies what's called Austrian economics and the Austrian business cycle theory. Not only Peter Schiff, but many, if not all, Austrian economists predicted the collapse in housing and the financial sector, while it blindsided almost everybody else. It's called Austrian economics because its originators and developers came from Austria. One more thing, really quickly before we explain the theory, there are libertarians who don't apply Austrian economics, and they are at a supreme disadvantage. Just one example includes the famous John Stossel. Right before the economy collapsed, Stossel wrote two articles entitled "The Sky is Not Falling" and "Dire News from My Colleagues," saying that the threat of recession was just media hype and our supposed free market was fine. So an understanding and application of Austrian economics would have prevented John Stossel from making such an enormous error. So let's dive into this and learn about the Austrian business cycle theory. A good piece of information to know is that Friedrich Hayek, a famous Austrian economist, won the Nobel Prize in economics for his elaboration of this theory. If you're new to this, you can understand it, don't worry. So here's the Austrian business cycle theory. To begin, we are all familiar with interest rates. If you take out a loan and borrow money, you will pay an interest rate. In an economy, there are two ways interest rates can come down. The first and healthy way is through an increase in savings. If people save their money in banks, then banks have more on hand to lend, which causes the price of lending interest rates to go down. It's not too hard to see why. When the supply of anything rises, its price will go down. So to reiterate, people save their money in banks, increasing the money banks have to lend, and the price of lending comes down. The main point is savings bring about lower interest rates. Conversely, if people don't save their money, banks have a shortage of funds and charge higher interest rates. This encourages people to save their money, and if people save, interest rates come down. This is how interest rates work in a free market. They are not arbitrary numbers that you can just tinker around with without serious consequences. Here's the important thing about savings and low interest rates. Entrepreneurs see the low interest rates and are encouraged to engage in long-term investment projects. A high interest rate is very costly over a long period of time, so low interest rates make long-term investments much more profitable and even possible. Low interest rates also mean that consumers have saved their money. They have deferred consumption in the present in order to consume in the future. That makes long-term investments through savings worthwhile, since consumers will be able to consume in the future because they have foregone consumption in the present. And the resources that consumers free up by not consuming immediately and saving instead provide the resources that the entrepreneurs need to engage in their investment projects. There is, therefore, a time coordination mechanism with interest rates. Low interest rates mean consumers are saving and will consume in the future. Businesses and entrepreneurs therefore match the consumer's time preference and invest in long-term projects that will be finished in the future when the consumers are ready to consume. The resources the entrepreneurs use to see their investment projects through to completion come from the pool of savings of the consumers. This is how healthy, sustainable economic growth occur. Savings are the key in all of this. If this was a little foggy, go back and watch it again and take a moment to digest it. If not, we'll move on. There is a second way interest rates can come down. That is through an artificial injection of money created out of thin air that is given to banks. This is done nowadays by central banks, and in the US, the central bank is the Federal Reserve System, created by the US government in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act. The Fed's purpose is to control the money supply and interest rates of the US. The Fed lowers interest rates by flooding the market with money, by artificially increasing the money supply. Now, this isn't some crazy libertarian conspiracy. Everybody knows this. It's a policy tool of the Fed. This is one of its primary functions. Now, what happens when interest rates are lowered artificially by the Fed and not through real savings? Well, people haven't actually saved. They have not deferred consumption for the future. They are consuming now. But entrepreneurs and businesses begin engaging in long-term investment projects. So there is a disjunction between consumer and entrepreneur time preferences. The whole coordination of free market interest rates is thrown off by artificial interest rates from the Fed. Furthermore, there is a fundamental difference between flooding the market with newly printed or digital money from the Fed and genuine savings. When people save, they are freeing up resources that can be used by entrepreneurs to engage in their long-term investment projects. Savings provide a real pool of resources that entrepreneurs can draw from in order to sustainably complete their projects. But when the Fed artificially lowers interest rates by injecting money into banks' reserves, there is no increase in the pool of resources that have been saved that entrepreneurs can draw from in order to complete their long-term investments. There are not enough saved resources to sustain all the new long-term investment projects because the amount of saved resources is unchanged. The resources just don't exist. Resources don't magically appear simply because a gigantic bundle of dollars has been printed. Artificial credit causes unsustainable structural problems and disjunctions in the economy. But it isn't realized at first. In fact, there is initially a boom from the artificially low interest rates when the long-term investments are begun. However, when businesses start competing with each other for the limited resources necessary to complete their projects, prices start rising and they are forced to borrow more money. Of course, this increase in demand for loans works to push interest rates back up. Soon enough, with a rise in interest rates, it is revealed that the long-term investments undertaken are unprofitable and unsustainable. When this is realized en masse, the unsustainable long-term investments, better called malinvestments, must come to a halt. All the resources and jobs that were driven into these malinvestments must be liquidated and cleared from the market. This is the recession, and it is the process by which the market corrects itself from the malinvestments and discoordination that was brought on by the artificial injection of credit. Once these malinvestments and all the bad debt are cleared from the market, the economy will reach a floor and be able to grow based on a solid foundation. If the Fed tries to prevent this process through keeping interest rates low even longer, it only exacerbates the problem by further misleading the entrepreneurs and extending the size and scope of the malinvestments or creating new ones, making the inevitable recession that much worse. The problem is not in the recession, but in the artificial boom and the artificial stage of false prosperity, where all the malinvestments were mistakenly undertaken, which occurred because of manipulation of the money supply. That's the Austrian business cycle theory in a nutshell. That might have been hard to take in, so if you had some trouble, go back and watch the section again and take some time to digest it. Now, here are the reasons why this critical view of the Fed and central banking in general is so helpful and crucial to libertarianism. First of all, it is the perfect explanation of the recent housing boom and bust, and it seems to be the only one that satisfactorily explains it. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are important, but they're not nearly enough by themselves. The same goes for the Community Reinvestment Act. Greenspan lowered interest rates to rock bottom in 2001 and held them there. A frenzy began with the Wall Street banks and home construction and mortgages. It turns out all the prosperity of the boom was an illusion. It was a bubble inflated by the Fed through artificially low interest rates. You must read Tom Wood's book called Meltdown. You will not regret it. I read it recently and I am so sorry that I waited this long. Meltdown is an absolute must if you want to understand the current crisis and if you want to learn more about Austrian economics, which has an unbeatable track record. Another reason why Austrian economics is necessary is that it's just consistent. Libertarians recognize that government management of anything, generally, if not always, leads to poor results. Manipulating the interest rate is a price control of money. We support no other price controls on any goods. Money should be no different. It shouldn't be hard to imagine that government-controlled money and monetary policy has terrible results. Completely private and free production of money by the market is far superior. Historically, gold and silver have been used as money, and private mints have always existed except when the state monopolizes money for its own interests. And let's look at the track record of the Fed. The Fed was created in 1913 and helped cause the Great Depression, the stagflation of the 1970s, the NASDAQ bubble of the 90s, and the housing bubble of the 2000s, not mentioning all the other smaller recessions that occurred during the 20th century. Are markets stable because of the Fed? Obviously not. The Dow has gone from 15,000 to under 8,000 and up and down again just in the past few years. Interest rates have ranged from currently 0 to above 20% in the 80s. Talk about volatility. Furthermore, and this is the kicker, the dollar has lost about 95% of its value since the Fed was created. This is terrible. This is why people have a hard time getting ahead. This is why there is such a wealth gap. The poor and the middle class are made fools if they save their money because the Fed's inflationary monetary policy erodes their savings. The Fed injects money into the economy by buying treasuries from banks, so the money goes directly to big Wall Street banks first. This means the banks enjoy the money first and get to spend it before prices are pushed up. But as the new money filters through the economy, prices rise. So by the time it gets to the people who aren't politically connected, the people on the bottom, that new money has lost its value because prices have already risen. The Fed's policies are a wealth transfer from the poor and middle class to rich bankers who rob people through inflation, if not directly through bailouts. This is the most unlibertarian thing I can think of. Government-induced inflation and bank bailouts have to go. This is a corporatist system, not free markets. But what's important is that inflation and a debased currency aren't natural. In free markets, people naturally gravitate towards money that retains its value, like gold and silver, for obvious reasons. In a free market, steady, gradual deflation is what's natural due to a constant money supply and a rising amount of new goods and services. In a free market of money that's not monopolized by the state, people's savings would actually gain value. Things would gradually become cheaper over time, and saving for retirement would be much easier. That's what happened before the Fed. The dollar gained value in the 19th century, even with the enormous inflation of the Civil War. Additionally, the Austrian explanation of the business cycle also shows how important savings are for an economy, because only savings lead to healthy, strong, sustainable investment and economic growth. All these calls for increased consumer spending and stimulus are just dead wrong. Yes, production is intended for future consumption, but only savings and production allow for consumption. Without savings and investment and production, we can't consume anything. Furthermore, people would be employed by the investment projects undertaken because of savings, so savings do not lead to unemployment. We need savings and not spending for a healthy economy. You might think there are some loose ends still. For example, what about before the Federal Reserve in the 19th century when there were panics and bank runs? What about manias and animal spirits? Aren't those causes too? There's not enough time to talk about that here, so I will direct you to Dr. Tom Wood's book, Meltdown. He has his PhD from Columbia, so he's not some crackpot. He knows what he's talking about. You can also watch a talk he gave at the University of Colorado about the contents of Meltdown. It's a great video to watch, seriously. Tom Woods also has a channel on YouTube called Tom Woods TV. If you're interested in Peter Schiff, he has a YouTube channel called Schiff Report. If you're interested in Austrian economics, the Mises Institute is the place for reading about it and studying it. Go to Mises.org to learn more about it. They have tons of books and essays and journals free online that you can read. It is a wealth of good economic information. And to all the libertarians out there, Austrian economics is essential. Another thing, never be rude, condescending, or nasty when you argue with someone. Please always use polite civil language and your words will be listened to much more readily. It makes such a difference. Thank you for watching. Please comment, rate, and subscribe.